Rough start, huh? Must have been pretty humiliating.
Get out of my room.
See, I'm worried about the next act. Just not sure you're feeling up to it.
Stop. Please stop.
How about I dance the Black Swan for you?
Leave me alone!
Envious enmeshment, when competition becomes fatal. So the clip that was referenced at the very beginning of this video is from the film Black Swan. Thank you to the individual who suggested this film as an analysis for today. But nevertheless, what was depicted was essentially a rivalry, and it was designed to be considered healthy competition between two ballerinas. You have the, original person, the person who has been in this particular environment for longer, who is the main character, Nina. And you have this newcomer who's coming in, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, but clearly has a lot of potential, and her name is Lily. So as I did research on the film, but specifically both of these characters' dynamic, it made me think about a couple of things, a couple of points that I've highlighted in previous analyses. But one thing that I haven't touched on, and it is tied to envy, but this is highlighting how to navigate professional settings and understanding how intense they can become, right? Especially with the envious archetype, such as what Nina was presenting in the film, where a person has made their profession, their dreams, their goals, their entire livelihood. So their worth, their sense of self-worth and confidence is tied to their profession or their performance. And I've also spoken on this recently, mainly in like my YouTube lives, where I've been specifically addressing workplace dynamics, professional dynamics, also understanding how there are embedded codes within these systems a lot of the time, these systems of power or prominence. And understanding the fact that these are exceptional spaces because a lot of the time people's livelihood is connected to their work. So I think that Nina depicted this perfectly and why her response to Lily was so strong. But I believe that there was some other components that played a huge factor. One of them being that in the film, it, was depicted Nina battled with some kind of mental health issues, and she often struggled with hallucinations and delusions. Now, in the context of envy, this can become exceptionally dangerous. And in the book Green Eyes in particular, there's an excerpt titled Beauty Envy that mentions how a lot of the time an envious person will operate from a state of delusion where they're desperately trying to attain or maybe even sustain a sense of superiority over the person that they're feeling envy towards. And even though this particular excerpt in the book was leaning more towards physicality, right, beauty envy exclusively, the principle still applies in this case, especially when we talk about a person who is dealing with delusions regarding their target of envy. I think this is highlighting the fact that when you are dealing with the envious person, it's important for you not to feel guilt or shame for setting boundaries or kind of changing the way that you approach the situation when you realize that they're showing some signs of envy, because 9 times out of 10, they are dealing with warped thinking regarding you. So the beauty envy excerpt reads, beauty envy is prevalent when a person is envious of an individual's physical appearance. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and is completely subjective, but a person who is envious of another person can feel threatened by their aesthetic or the attention the subject of envy receives from others. This person may mimic their object of envy and by the same token talk down to them, gossip about them, and belittle their target. This can even lead to delusion under special circumstances. To alleviate feelings of envy, the perpetrator will try to convince themselves that they are superior to their target of envy. And even though I believe that the envy in Nina's case was more so rooted in trying to protect her spot as a ballerina or protect her, position with certain, opportunities, I do believe that the beauty envy principle still is relevant in this case, because there was even a moment where people were complimenting Lily and like the way that she looked and things like that. And obviously Nina started to internalize it. So another thing to take note of is this: when you are coming into a new environment, you're acclimating yourself to a new space, and you're dealing with someone who is trying to entail a superiority complex over you because they have superiority, right? Whether it be they were there for longer or they feel like they have more experience than you, but you are still receiving some kind of attention because you're good at what you do. You just might be a little bit newer. Understand that a lot of the time this is where the envy begins to fester, and the reason being that the person perceives you as their replacement, even if you're not trying to, right? So when you're coming into spaces, you have to be prepared for this. And I think that this kind of ties into the competition principle that a lot of you all are familiar with if you have been reading the book and obviously have been up to date with like my analyses and things like that. You all know that competition is one of the 5 stages of envy, but for those who are new here, I'm going to go ahead and read from that excerpt as well. Stage 3, competition. Covetousness then leads to the next stage, competition. This is where an envious person aims to compete with the person in hopes of attaining what they have or outperforming a person they are envious of. So now that we've addressed competition through the lens of envy specifically, I want to talk about the flip side of competition, specifically how competition is utilized in professional spaces. A lot of the time, people ignite competition or they encourage competition. They kind of blow it off and consider it as something that's a necessary evil, right? When we talk about a professional opportunity or some kind of professional capacity. Competition is typically used to ignite motivation in people within a professional occupational setting. Now, the dangerous part about it is this: if people haven't understood or learned how to conceptualize envy for themselves, it's going to be difficult for them to discern when things are becoming dangerous. And to explain how competition is used in professional settings a little bit more, I'm going to read from the Create Competition excerpt in this book. Competition keeps members controlled, divided, and distracted. When a dominating system senses losing control over its subordinates, it will spark competition among them. This keeps them focused on competing rather than on the system's true agenda. And even better, it keeps them submissive. To successfully navigate these environments, one must manage their feelings of jealousy. And as we saw in the clip at the very beginning of this video, it got to the point where Nina's jealousy and envy led to her physically attacking a young woman who had no interest in harming her or not necessarily taking her spot, but she was just competing, right, due to the nature of the work that they were doing. So it's a two-way street. The first thing is this: I'm gonna be completely transparent. Now, of course, there are certain professions, there are certain lanes where competition just comes with the territory. But if I'm going to be honest, jealousy and envy, when you are navigating systems of power, can be considered a personal vice. If you cannot control your feelings of jealousy and envy, anyone can control you, and I believe that that was perfectly depicted in this film. If someone can play on your jealousy and envy and get you to do something more or bend over backwards, then that is showing that you are not in a position to where you can go up against the big dogs. I'm gonna be real with you. If you can't even keep your own emotions in check, if you battle, you're still battling with feelings of comparing and competing, you are not ready to step into the lion's den. If you can be easily swayed, as long as someone throws someone into your environment that you feel slightly intimidated by, and they know that that's all it takes in order for them to get you to do what they want you to do or for you to self-destruct because they don't like you, you are not ready to navigate these spaces. Because if people are able to entail power over you, you're not ready to navigate systems of power because you don't even know how to preserve your own sense of power. And there's a whole chapter in the book, Green Eyes, that's dedicated to self-reflection because overcoming feelings of jealousy and envy within yourself is a prerequisite before you start navigating spaces. Because as I stated before, jealousy and envy is no different from any other vice. It's just simply an emotional vice. Now, the flip side of this analysis is dedicated to people who might be the target of envy, right? Especially when we're talking about professional spaces. And you can align with Lily's character more so. You're being targeted out of envy. Understand how important it is, even if you're not fighting to be someone's successor, never, ever, ever, ever give the predecessor relevant or try to appease to them or bend over backwards for them to make them feel better when you realize that they have started to show signs of envy. Because as depicted in the film, and as I've stated previously, as I've stated in previous analyses, when you are dealing with an envious individual, it is synonymous to somebody having some kind of mental imbalance, because they have convinced themselves in order to feel better, they have to pose a constant threat to their target of envy. So all you're doing is putting yourself in harm's way when you refuse or feel bad about implementing boundaries once you pick up on those red flags. Now, in a professional capacity, you have to approach this with a different strategy. So in the event of you being positioned as someone's successor, you have to essentially perform a balancing act. So you're balancing two different approaches. One is not necessarily igniting or fueling the jealousy, the envy and division by rubbing it in the person's face or making sly remarks and comments. However, at the same time, you're not necessarily fighting against the current when people are putting you in a prominent position or preparing to put you in a prominent position. And the reason being that when a person is operating with the state of envy, or they feel like that you are going to be the person who is going to replace them, they aren't going to show you any mercy, because the fall from grace is completely different from you working yourself up to establishing your own reign. To explain this further, I'm going to read from 2 additional excerpts in the book. Never revive who you're going to replace. The key to comfortably sitting on one's throne is to resist resurrecting a predecessor. If you realize you don't have enough influence to sabotage a successor, you'll likely attempt to manipulate them into falling with you. However, if you find yourself in a position of succession, avoid starting unnecessary battles. Most importantly, don't let anyone ride your coattails. The other section I want to read from, which is essentially about asserting your dominance and making sure that people don't necessarily push you out of a reign that is clearly being positioned for you. I'm going to read from the excerpt titled Take the Throne, and it reads, in the event of becoming someone's successor, whether intentional or accidental, stepping into someone's role as successor requires you to seize the position with unwavering authority. The fall of a former leader is rarely a smooth transition. It's a battle, often brutal, despite any efforts to extend kindness. The anguish of losing power is a weight few can carry with grace. In reality, acknowledging this shift will fuel a fierce determination in the former leader to cling to their position. Their work ethic will intensify, and their drive to stay relevant will become more evident than ever. And there's actually another excerpt in the book Green Eyes that talks about this type of person who believes that they've lost their crown to you in some way, shape, or form. But specifically, that excerpt goes into detail as far as why these types of envious persons require you stepping back and not engaging in back and forth behavior, because it's typically going to be more relentless and ruthless for reasons presented in the excerpt I just now read from in the book In the Lion's Den, Navigating Systems of Power. So studying both of those sections in both books will help you understand how showing mercy to a person who envies you is really an act of self-sabotage. So in sum, babes, do not build up someone who was only interested in tearing you down. All right, babes, that's all that I have for this video. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. But of course, I want to hear you all's comments, your opinions, perspectives, and your personal experiences in the comment section below. I look forward to speaking to you guys in the next one, babes. Take care.